recording. Welcome everyone. For people that don't know me, I am Liz Stuffins, Chair of the Midlands Parks Forum. And as it says on the slides, if you could mute your mic and your video, that will help with logistics. Not mute your video, obviously. Stop videoing yourself. There's going to be a question and answer session at the end of part 1 and at regular intervals in part 2. And if you have any questions, can you use the raise your hand facility on the screen at the bottom, and then lower your hand afterwards. That'll help. And any questions, could you use the chat function on the right hand side of the screen? Thank you very much. So we've got 2 new members, according to Alison, Chesterfield Borough Council, and we've got Chesterfield here today. That's Sarah Poulton. So welcome, Sarah. And Erosh have joined us as well. So that's really good news. Another 2 from the east. That's the agenda for today. So we've got Sue France, who's the CEO of Green Estate, and Emma Sibbing from Solihull. And Sue's going to talk to us about creating wildflower meadows sort of across the country, really, but focusing down at the end of the session on what's been happening at Solihull. Then we'll have a questions session after that. And then Joe from Birmingham, Joe Hayden's going to update us a little bit about travelling fun fairs. And there'll be an opportunity for questions after that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some funding that's on the horizon, the green recovery funding. And then there'll be a few sort of extra administrative things at the end, updates about the Midlands Parks Forum, case studies and what have you. So I'm going to hand over now to Alison, who's going to sort out the slides from her end. So you don't need me to stop presenting, do you, Alison?
No, that's fine. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Great.
So over to you then, Sue.
Thank you. Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad, Liz, that you actually changed the title. I thought, my goodness, this is going to be like a false story, because it is all about inspiration around naturalistic planting. So it's a whole introduction, but yes, sort of share things that have been happening elsewhere, and then we'll home in, hopefully with Emma, actually about Solihull, something that's close to home. There are a huge number of slides here, so don't panic. We will sort of try and get through them. It is more about inspiration and ideas than anything else. When we get to some of the techie bits, we just haven't got time to go into too much of it, but it may be something that we can talk about later, about actually how those people that kind of inspired by this might want to share their own stories, but equally they might want to know a little bit more about actually how things are done. So I've never done this before, where someone else controls my slides. It's quite odd. So I thought a very appropriate green flag thing every time I want to have it moved. That's okay. So this is a story that actually started in Sheffield, but it has actually spread out. It's just that in Sheffield, the University of Sheffield has had a real involvement in looking at very, very new approaches to what we used to describe as just wildflower meadows, and we'll come on to actually this misnomer about wildflower meadows. And it's sort of thanks to a number of people. This is Professor Nigel Doddett. Some people might know Professor James Hitchmore. So there was this kind of real core of interest in new approaches. And I have to stress that this is new. This is new, even though we've been doing it for 20 years now. So, I often feel overwhelmed by it. So when people are trying to absorb these new ideas, don't think that this is mainstream yet. So, Sheffield, rather an odd centre for horticulture, I have to say. I mean, certainly when I came here first, it was like the kind of the black hole. I mean, apart from privet, that was about all there was, But it has sort of transformed things. But as I say, you know, it's been, I think, a bit of a global centre just because we have so many students here. Right, so next slide, please. Just to say something about myself, I mean, I come from both a horticulture and a parks background, and I'll touch actually on who we are as an organisation. But I came to Sheffield 20 years ago, and this was basically my world. You know, so I'd left parks behind. I was working down at Camden, the parks department, and I came to lead on the regeneration programme. And rather than parks, our best park actually was some mown amenity grass. Quite proud of that, you know, and a broken set of swings. And this was the rest of it. And this was the problem we were really setting out to try and solve, really. How do you vegetate this? How do you make this kind of environment beautiful for people living in communities which are pretty broken, actually, you know, and have long since ceased to see anything of any beauty in the natural world. So we were sort of set about trying to tackle this. And cover the next slide. The inspiration we actually had, Alison, was actually from the wild. So we were looking at the wild environments, especially where the environment was filled with flower. Now, I think that was a particular interest, was the impact that flower actually has when it's en masse. And for those of you that have been in parks as long as me, you might remember the dearth of an awful lot of our floral displays, and how we went through the sort of particularly the clean and green agenda, and everything got wiped out. And it's this massive immersive floral experience that we were really looking at to be inspired by. So next slide. However, we weren't just interested in what was actually happening in the UK. I mean, the UK has got it's got a lovely flora. There's no two ways about it, but it's terribly limited. We were cut off by the Ice Age. It meant that the kinds of floral displays that other parts of the world actually enjoy are basically very limited for us. So if you just took British flora, you'd have a beautiful display in June of meadow buttercup and a few other things, but not much else. So yeah, I think we got a bit technicolor. You know, we wanted these amazing floral blooms that happened elsewhere. So North American prairie. Next picture. South Africa. These absolutely the kind of things you see on calendars, really, but exist actually out there. Next one. This is West China. Some of the really ancient water meadows. Again, some of the floral blooms that actually happen in North America. Amazing immersive colour. And the next picture, which I think is quite an important one. What actually happens when you get this colour on a vast scale, this profusion of wildflowers, is the fact that people are drawn to it. Yeah, I think that was one of. Sorry, can you just Alison, just go back a tick?
Sorry.
Yeah, you're getting too excited now.
Oh yeah, I'm getting carried away.
Just calm down. Won't move on to the techie yet. Yeah, I think for us. And we'll come on to the things we started to do, but it's the fact that actually, you know, you suddenly realise that there's a massive human reaction to colour, and it's something that I think we lost in parks, we lost in horticulture. We got very techie basically. We were very obsessed about cleanliness and of course, you know, surviving actually with everything on a budget, and we kind of lost this amazing excitement that draws people, you know, to public spaces. So obviously this is happening in the wild, but this is the kind of thing that we were looking to create. And that's really the journey that we've been on for the last 20 odd years, you know, and are still really only at the starting point. So it's trying to create these amazing sort of global wildflower meadows, but you know, in our rather grim environment, actually, sometimes, especially, you know, up in Sheffield, instead. So now you can move on to the next one, Alison. I think there's the things that there's a lot of interest in wildflower meadows, but we were very much looking collectively with the university at something that was new. You know, this is about things for urban design. This wasn't about conservation per se. This wasn't about just say British natives. It was about urban environments, and I think. There's a few things here about things that we discovered over the years that you really needed. It was about designing. You know, this is not something that just happens spontaneously. You have to design these things, and what you're trying to give people is an idealized version. You know, this is horticulture. This is parks. This is not nature absolutely in the raw. So it's an idealized version of nature. That doesn't mean to say it's not biodiverse. It absolutely is. You know, a lot of the native fauna is absolutely happy about everything. But there is an ecological side to this, that you're trying to create these new communities. You might be drawing plants from all over the globe, actually, although a lot of them are still UK natives. But you are trying to develop new ecological communities that will thrive in our urban environments and our parks environments. And one of the big things, I say, is high floral content. There's a big trigger that goes from green to flower, where people will say, I don't like it, to, basically grown men weeping and dropping at the knees and things like that. So there's a real thing about flower, and it's about longevity of flowering too. So it's about the longest period you can get with flowering, and it almost immediately becomes popular with the public. Of course, it also has to be, you can do the most amazing things on an unlimited budget, but coming from a parks background, working as I do in what is one of the most deprived neighbourhoods in the UK, with no money, we knew it had to be low maintenance, low management inputs, and basically cheaper than what we currently had. So it had to be beautiful, it had to evoke nature, it had to be genuinely biodiverse, and it had to be absolutely cost effective. Super. Next slide. So the thing is it actually achievable? This was the holy grail, I suppose, we set out to do. I'd say we're getting there. I'd say we're not there completely. It takes a whole shift. This is different. It's about change. It's and change takes time. It takes time because we have to have confidence. We have to develop new kind of techniques. We have to all have a go at it. We have to learn, and we have to take the public with us, and our managers and operatives with us, and everything. And it is new. It's a new field of horticulture and landscape management. There's a word I'll use over and over again. It's about a dynamic landscape. We are used to, in our parks and our horticulture, to putting plants where we expect them to stay. A lot of the art is keeping perfection and almost time frozen, and suddenly we're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of plants in the landscape that change. Very exciting, but also very different and quite scary. And they are all referred to, as wildflowers. So there's a lot of lack of technical knowledge about this. And not everything works. It's as simple as that. In terms of inputs, they are less than conventional horticulture, but they have to be intelligent. So we're requiring less input, but more knowledge. Not always easy. And this idea that you're actually introducing these more relaxed systems, that it just means it's different. It just means that there will be mess. It just means there will be death at times. This is not a frozen in time, pristine landscape. This is something that is changing. So, it's achievable. We've learned a lot, but it is going to change. So I'm going to introduce you to some of the early work we did to start with. The next slide, and we'll run through these fairly fast. The way we started, and a lot of the images that you'll see associated with this kind of work, and they're all described as wildflower meadows, and I can assure you, anyone that's a horticulturist will stare at that and say they're not British natives, But the work was all with annuals. So an annual seed is one that I'm sure you all know. Grows. You sow it in the spring, it grows. It flowers, it dies. The joy about annuals is that they're remarkably easy. So our very, very early work, you saw that earlier picture of the derelict houses. We had something like about 600 hectares across Sheffield of housing development land in really, really grim conditions. And we somehow managed to persuade Sheffield City Council at the time to give us the maintenance contract. They were spending about £500,000 a year just doing gypsy buns and clearing fly tipping. And we persuaded them to give us the contract, and we transformed them into these urban flower meadows. And I have to confess, we did sow the seed in the first year, broke every piece of machinery we actually had because it was really difficult conditions. And I wouldn't say that any single resident wanted us to do this. They wanted houses. They thought this was some hippy-dippy nonsense, which was never going to work. And we more or less sowed these landscapes and ran away for about 6 weeks and hid, you know. And then the flowers came out, and it was transformational, you know, over large scale. Look at the next picture. Suddenly, these really derelict sites turned into these amazing flower meadows, which just suddenly transformed people. You know, there were builders going around with flowers in their hard hats. There was kids actually picking the flowers for the parents. There were all the public were coming out and saying, we don't want houses here anymore. We'd like wildflower meadows, please. You know, and yeah, it was really interesting to see how people reacted. And if we just shoot through the next set of slides, this idea about developing and introducing these kind of things into particularly temporary development sites, housing sites. This is Bolton. This is, I don't know where this is, but you know, you can see how you can just play with these annual meadows just with a grass verge and rough ground, you know, a bit of a Chatsworth thing. I think that's Leeds, actually. It started to spread right across. So these are all annuals, but very designed high impact. Ooh, a strange slide. Oh, that's better. That's Sheffield, actually. And again, you can see the scale of this. It's the scale that is so interesting in a large urban context. You know, when you sort of see things like the very urban against this. Yeah, just carry on. Pickies. I'll pause at the end of annuals for any questions. Next one, Alison. Yep, I think that's North Sheffield, actually. And then from the early work on housing, I say that we probably worked mostly on housing sites, demolition sites, development sites in the north predominantly for probably about the first 5 years. You know, learned an awful lot about it, perfected a lot of the techniques, and what was most important was other local authorities picking this up. You know, it was the fact that others actually started to see it, came and maybe you know, sort of talked about the schemes and had the confidence to start doing it themselves, and then from them they would feed information back. So this idea about reciprocal knowledge, really important when you're dealing with things like this. So the next big thing it went on is went out into verges. I mean, it went to Rotherham, which was they're probably the first local authority to really take it up large scale, 8 kilometres of highway. Goodness knows where this is. I think probably Hartlepool, actually, which has done massive schemes. And the impact, again, of suddenly drivers going past this kind of vegetation. This is, again, it's annual, it's sown, it saved quite a lot of money because on things, particularly on highway verges where they had to do road closures, X number of times a year, the fact that you'd come and just do one road closure in the year, prepare the ground overnight, sow the seed, and then walk away and leave it for the rest of the season, saved quite considerable amounts of money and gave this kind of impact. Next one. Quite a few years back now, it seems historic now, it then went to the Olympics. So this again was this was the first time really it was taken out of maybe these slightly more maybe disadvantaged areas in the north of England in particular, and actually hit the national headlines. And this was a really interesting thing about completely inverting the way that we presented meadows and flowers generally. So instead of actually having, you know, seas and seas of grass with a few beds in, this idea that you have this totally immersive landscape of flowers with just small areas where people would pass through. And also, you know, the fact that you can create these landscapes for such a high profile event as this. It was an immensely scary project, I have to say. But yeah, it did pull off. And again, it pushed knowledge forward. I think there's probably a couple of Olympic slides there. Alison, the next one there. Yeah, another one there, and then another one. Yeah. So again, this kind of idea of huge immersive landscapes. And again, I don't think I've got any images here, but what again was amazing, and we've got lots of pictures of this, is how people wanted to be in the flowers. So, you know, we saw that earlier picture of the Californian floral blooms. I have to say, Olympics was just like that. You know, as was our clear sites in Sheffield. You know, people were inside these meadows. People were putting their kids in there. People were taking selfies and pictures and what have you. Yeah, and just excited. Yeah, it was great. Lovely. Okay, next pick. And then, yeah, it got into more, I suppose, onto the parks side of things. Parks were surprisingly slow to take this up. I think the main reason is that you know, there was much more vested interest in traditional horticulture. You know? Whereas I think of the sites we started with, it was desperation that drew, that drove this forward. Sometimes when you've got no other solutions, people will do anything. Parks were much slower, and yet I think this is a fantastic technique for introducing to parks and replacing a lot of our sort of more traditional borders. Right, and just keep going. This is actually Trentham, which is it's a semi-private, semi-public place. It used to be a public park and it's now private. But I just want to pick up on a bit of technical thing here. This is one slide early in the year, and we'll see another slide in a minute, exactly the same place later on. The point I want to make here is actually how these are designed. The way we put compositions together, and this and the university, this was quite a radical thought, was about designing with colour palettes and designing specifically for long season. So the concept behind a lot of these is that early in the season, the first emerging plants basically, flower, and then successive waves of plants flower, but they tend to be taller than the early ones. And in that way, they get taller and taller and taller. They mask the dead heads, and also very conveniently, they mask any weeds as well. The other thing to note on this looks as if there's lots of maybe, some very clever bits of sowing. This is all the same mix responding to soil conditions. This was a capability brown landscape where they ripped out a huge amount of trees. So the substrate's got a lot of tree roots in it. And it's how this complex variety of flowers and plants responds to soils, creates these exactly what we wanted, sort of impressionistic views. So we just go to the next slide. Same place, same mix, just later in the year. So this is getting into kind of September time. So you can see that what you're starting to get in a landscape is this notion of seasonal change as well. The kind of the beauty of the flowers, kind of impressionistic pictures which are as much driven by the soil conditions, and then this notion of seasonal change. And that again is both quite exciting, and we found that the public respond to considerably, but it's quite scary for managers, because again we're not used to doing this anymore. We're not used to things changing. Lovely. And then that next one, Alison. And yeah, it went bling all over the place. It can get very blingy, but suddenly everybody wanted for their private garden, which is great, because that's basically how we fund ourselves. We're a not-for-profit, we're a social enterprise. We're very much focused on our managing our local parks without budgets and doing research and development around this kind of approach. And it's nice people like this that want it for their weddings that actually fund us. So it's rather nice. And tourist attractions, keep going. Otherwise, I'll be stuck on annuals forever. And the next one, Alison. And I think more recently, we've been doing a lot of work overseas as well, which is really useful, because what it's doing is also testing things in lots of different environments and climates. So that is some imagery which is all about annual meadows. And as I say, I would say probably up to about a few years ago, any image that you'd have seen which looked a bit like this and was professed to be a wildflower meadow would have been a designed annual meadow mix. So a little bit of techie stuff, and then if anyone wants to actually ask any quick questions on this before we move on to the perennials. But Alison, if you just do the next one, just to say something about how we establish these. I do this talk sometimes in Denmark, and they all cringe when they see the sprayer. But I need to really point out, you cannot sow and establish a meadow on dirty soil. It has to be clean. So it's like preparing any kind of seed bed. The very best cleanest thing you can do is amenity grass. It needs to be sprayed off. It needs to be killed. And the next stage is a bit of light rotivating. So it gets rotivated to a bit of a fine tilth. And then next slide. It gets sown. You can sow by hand, you can sow by machine. And the ideal on this is to do this pretty quickly. Most of the spraying starts early season, as early as you can get on the ground, March onwards. By the time you've cultivated, you're keen to sow the same day, preferably. The least time you have this soil exposed, the better. Next slide, Alison. And then, absolute critical thing, you roll the seed in. This gives 100% difference in terms of survival. Massive, massive difference. And then basically that's it. You walk away from the site, you leave it, it grows. You often get flowers about 6 weeks after sowing. And at the end of the season, this is a bit of a false slide actually, because actually this isn't really the end of the season. But at the end of the season, you actually just cut the thing down. To be frank about it with annuals, if you cut them really at the end of the season, and I'm talking November, December time, there is so little material. It's so dry and it's so fine. You just cut it with any machine. You can cut it with a garden mower, you know, and it just flies, and that's it. And then the next year, you have to start all over again. I'm just going to stop at that point just to see if there's any burning questions at that point before I start rambling on to the next bit. Does anybody want to ask anything about that at this point?
Can I just ask, what is the approximate cost per hectare?
It's about I can't remember whether the whole operation works out at about £1. I'm going to have to send you these costs actually, otherwise I'm going to give you the wrong costs. I think it works out at less than £1 a square metre. That still sounds quite. That's for spraying, cultivating, rolling, seed, and the year's management. I'm pretty sure. But I think I'd have to confirm that. I'm so out of date with costs at the moment.
Perhaps if you could send that through to
Definitely.
Alison, and then she could circulate that, that would be really helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
It's certainly compared to certainly compared to any floral feature, it's minuscule, as I say, and there's definitely savings if you're doing things like row closures. I think our big comparison always was, could you actually cut something cheaper than gangmown grass? And I have to confess that is still a real challenge. Gangmown grass is probably still and remains the cheapest thing you can more or less do, once established. But yeah, I'll send you costs. So annual pictorial meadows, they were great, they're lovely, they're reliable, fantastic, they're relatively cheap in comparison. But I think, again, what we really wanted was something that was much, much more sustainable. We were interested in perennials, we're interested in long-term perennial meadows, but designed around the same kind of idea. Very long design meadows, very long flowering, but would be there for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years plus. Yeah. And this has been a challenging journey. It really has. I would say it's only in the last 6 or so years, even though we've been playing with these for a very long time, we are really starting to understand them. And this, I would say, is what most people actually experience after a year. You sow a wildflower meadow, you see all the pictures, and this is normally what you get. And that's because we're mostly dealing with high fertility soils with a very aggressive weed seed bank. And we're sowing things which I've come on to are doomed to failure, really. And this is what you end up with, which, is great for biodiversity. There's nothing wrong with it for biodiversity, but it's not really very popular with the public. So you can frame it, but it's not really what you want. So next slide. And we spent an awful lot of time trying to find out what the heck was going wrong, and we found lots of things were going wrong with the whole industry. We found things like basically most of the seed was dead. Actually, it was not even true to type. And this is when we started. We found, I think, our first sets. We found that 50% of the seed was neither true to type and it was dead. And then the fact that no one actually knew what was supposed to come up. And the fact that some of the very desirable species, you take something like primrose, you take something like grass, which works out about £3 a kilo, and then you take something like primrose, £6,000 a kilo. You take some of the plants we deal with, £52,000 a kilo. It's not surprising that in your mix that you've just gone on board, which is probably dead to start with, not true to type, is mostly grass, because no one's going to put too much primrose seed in it. So there was a total lack of science. And a lot of what we did with the university was to try and unpick this, to really understand how these plants grew, actually. And there was no information about this. There was lots of information about what happened if you put them in a glass house, if you were producing plants commercially. Nothing about what happens when you sow 30 different species together in a slug-infested field in Sheffield. subject to all the conditions. And this was one of the big problems, is that because we didn't know, you didn't know what you were following through. So an awful lot of time has been spent on slowly building up knowledge of data. And this is how we end up putting our mixes together. We have a lot of design sessions, but it's backed by actually going, how many of these will work ecologically? You know, we discovered, as a really good example, we discovered if you had too many, oxeye daisy is a very cheap plant. People love it. It's lovely. You know, it's in every wildflower mix because it grows. You know, it's also dirt cheap. You have too many oxeye daisies in your mix, it will kill everything else. It's like a aggressive weed. So you're going, oh crikey, you know, you quickly discover that 50, you know, is not very good, and you start to have to actually work them down. So we end up having these compositions of lots of ground cover plants that are going to flower early, the sort of the numbers, less plants that emerge above that are bigger, and then even less of the what we call the big stonkers, you know, the ones that will really draw the eye at the end of the season. And they all kind of go into calculations in the mix, so you can build up the idea, and then you know exactly what you're looking for too. So we spend an awful lot of time in the field crawling over everybody else's sites, going, oh yeah, that seems to be working exactly as planned, or you know, that's not working, and so you're adjusting all the time. And we deal with, at the moment, probably over 600 plants, and each one of them we've had to build this knowledge up for. And every time you combine them, the little devils do something different. Yeah, it's really quite interesting. Anyway, moving on, we'll quickly whiz through some science. Loads, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of plot work. Because again, you know, we all love plants. Well, I do anyway. You get very excited about all this lovely stuff. You see all this designer stuff, and then you have to actually work out, does it grow? And particularly, what do the slugs really love? You know, you can wipe out an entire meadow over one night with slugs. You know, it's quite shocking. And yeah, lots of staring at plots like this and counting different species and looking at percentages of what works, and just, yeah, carry on. Lots of staring at various statistics, which even, yeah, I can't remember how to do, but, you know, there is a lot of stuff. And this is where it's brilliant, because we have all these wonderful PhD students from university working on things. Lovely. And moving on. And then, yeah, lots of this. This is us. This is us crawling around, lots of hands and knees staring at stuff. Yep, and more. And, yeah, trying it in different places. So what has emerged from this after a very long period is a new style of perennial meadow, you know, which again will be called a wildflower meadow, but it's actually a designed meadow. So again, to the untrained eye, you know, people would say, oh, that's very beautiful. Well, I hope they say it's beautiful, but they think it's a wildflower meadow. Again, to the trained eye, you'll immediately be going, well, I can see cultivars in there. I can see things which are non-native to the UK, you know, but it's meadow-like. That's what we're after, meadow-like. And so just to have a look at some of the images, these are some of them just with a changing colour can just lift something, but, you know, very dainty, very fine, very meadow-like. Things which are more bulky, and and this is a park that you get something that maybe resembles in normal fertility in park soils, something to start with that looks more like a herbaceous border. So this is a meadow. It's cut every single year. That is basically what we do with it. And the material's taken away, but it resembles more, evokes more, probably a fairly relaxed herbaceous border in style. So suddenly you're starting to look at the style of how you can do this. You start to play with perennials. The choice is almost endless. It's quite exciting. There are limited annuals we can play with. British natives, there's only about 6. Wider natives, wider annuals, lots. You get onto perennials, the sky's the limit. So suddenly you start to get these quite exciting forms and foliage as well. Still a meadow, cut every single year. You know, it's not planted, it's seed sown. And there's a density and complexity there which really makes these into these ecological communities. This is one of our oldest seed sown meadows. This is about 16 years old, which is basically cut every year. And again, in a park, this is our park, in what is classified, or was classified when I started here, as the worst estate in Britain. Yeah. So being able to do this kind of thing, which is amazingly resilient in these kind of environments, has really been, I suppose, our goal. Again, yeah, just different kind of imagery, different color themes. You see the kind of the mixture between, again, that accessible grass and sort of the mown grass areas. This has been amazing, I suppose, through the pandemic. It's been able to have these landscapes too, where, believe it or not, we've been using the meadows as almost like social distancing areas. So you've got these glades and paths, but lots of buffer zones. But at the end of the season, the whole thing just gets mown. So again, you just get ideas of, as you start to build up the scale of these, you can do these in tiny scales. But what a lot of places have been doing is incrementally growing them. And you start to create these kind of flower-filled landscapes, which are become, well, they basically just create a life of their own. You know, I mean, I'm bobbing out now, and you know, they're taking over from all the grass. I mean, I hope to goodness there's no greenkeepers here, because you know, it is quite scary how they do start to move. And then you can also get into these quite exotic forms. So forms that we recognise, forms that actually might look very much like an enhanced native mix, and then these strange things where you're starting to actually look at forms that maybe are perfectly natural somewhere else, but you know, quite different. They're quite interesting. So how to do a perennial meadow, I'm going to run through this very quickly. Again, it's got to be very clean. It's got to be cultivated, exactly the same shot as I showed beforehand. And then moving on to the next slide. Oh, cracky, I didn't know what that's doing. Just move away from that, that's a mistake. One of the big things we've learned is that weed competition with perennials is the biggest killer. Yeah, and so the application of a mulch, and by a mulch, this is the material that you put over the surface of the ground when the weeds have been killed, that will suppress the seed bank, makes the most phenomenal difference in terms of seedling survival. This is PAS 100 spent, you know, green waste compost, which, you know, most local authorities can get their hands on pretty cheaply. You can use sand. We just don't find that sand works very well in park situations. You know, kids will get in and throw it around. But the mulch is a big difference. I mean, here Bill have just sprayed, and you can see how rough the ground is there. But it has been, you know, it has been weed treated, and it is critical to get rid of the weeds. And next slide. Seed sowing again. I don't know. Yeah, it's not on a mulch. Next one. That's using sand. So there are different techniques that are usable. So sand works as a very good mulch as well. Next slide. And then another major thing is that irrigation, again, we have learned makes a phenomenal difference. And this is challenging, you know, it really is. With perennials, you can actually sow all through the year, but there is no doubt about it that come spring, and we've been having some immensely dry springs recently, the last few years, if irrigation will make, again, 100% difference. And these are things we just didn't know, you know. And so if you're not necessarily prepared to do that, then it might not be worth it. In terms of management, it's an end of season cut. So this is right at the very end. This will probably be February. It's been left with all the beasts and bugs. You don't need to leave it that long, but it gets cut and it's raked. And I think I'll show you some more cycles of the whole year in a bit. That's about it. Right, the reason we love perennials, we have to say, we think it's transformed things, but they are not easy. You know, they really aren't easy. And for that reason, we started to play around with trying to produce a kind of a flower turf mat, basically in nursery conditions. And this has been really fascinating. I think it's transformed. It's allowed an awful lot of specifiers and users to actually use the product. All over the place. And when we come onto Solihull, that's what they used, because it's instant, because it's pre-grown. But it's also helped with us because it's pushed our knowledge on. We've been doing this for 6 years now, and it's allowed us to speed up our real knowledge of this. We visit most of our product every single year just to follow it all through, and you'll see pictures of that. So this thing about being able to grow it in perfect conditions, being able to get the perfect mix done right at the beginning, it gets laid, and essentially it takes all of the guesswork out. And then, you know, as I say, following it through, we've been able to adapt. We adapt the mixes every single year from what we learn. So just a few more slides to show how the product grows. It goes in the spring. This is it about 6 weeks later. You can see that what we're doing there is we're doing some of the things. We're irrigating it perfectly. It's on a perfectly clean soil. And we do this developmental cut because that allows the slower species to come through. Just keep going. That's what it looks like in the field. And then when it's lifted, you can see that it's on a sort of biodegradable matting, which acts as a mulch mat. But you can see that it just looks like an ordinary turf, but it's got a solid mass of root, which then is able to be transported. So all these little plantlets, about 150 to 200 a square metre, get shoved on a pallet, get transported all around the UK, and then hopefully onto the next few slides, you'll see some of it going down. So this is it. It can go down all through the year, although July and August isn't the best. It goes down. That's basically the next season. It's basically instantaneous. And we'll just see a few other kind of case studies like that. That's it arriving. That's actually Sheffield. It's on a roundabout site. It looks absolutely awful, doesn't it? It looks horrendous. Goes down. Should be a picture of my lovely team laying it. Yeah, that's all of us. Looks really grotty, but it just goes down like ordinary turf. That's it in the spring. Suddenly you've got all of that, and I think there's a few more shots. That's it a bit later in the year. Same mix. That's the same mix again. So you get this instant thing that goes down. Again, just another one goes down like that. That's where I think we sowed the grass in between. That's it in the spring. That's it in the summer. That's it in the late summer. It's worth just looking at the density of plants there. Earlier I showed you a slide of maybe what often our early wildflower meadows look like, with a load of grass and dock. That is the density that we strive to achieve. There's a magic number of about 150 plants a square metre, desirable plants and in the right composition. And can you see the layers there, the different foliage and the layers? So you're getting this kind of emerging. You get something with seed-sown landscapes that you cannot get with planted landscapes. And it's because eventually there are no gaps. There's a root mass and a no gap, and it becomes immensely resilient to weed invasion. So it's a different form. I have to be honest, February comes and it does go brown. Yeah. We do have customers and clients who believe it's going to actually look like our marketing shots all year round. But, I have to tell you the truth. It does go brown. You cut it. And you can cut it any time from September onwards. The longer you leave it, the better it is for the bugs. It's also a lot less material to take away, much lighter. But sometimes the public can't take it, so you might cut it early. And then the next spring, it's popped up again. So this is the following year. Again, stuff going down and stuff coming up straight away. And I think maybe it might be a couple more, and that's a bit later on in the season. Yes, some more. Those two slides are quite interesting. Sorry, Alison. Could you just go back a couple? Just go back one more. Sorry, and then forward. Lovely. I think another thing I wanted to stress here is that I talked about dynamic floral displays. They change according to where you put them. I mean, we might design all these ones and you might go, oh, this is Woodland Edge. You might go, I really love that. The reality is that they will change year on year. So this is year 2, and then the next slide is year 3, and you can see already that it looks different. So there are cycles, and then again, it's just more pictures of more meadows. Actually, I think, just to keep inspiring you. So you see the sort of scale of these colour-themed meadows. So these are all perennial design meadows. I keep going, otherwise we might be here forever. Keep going. So there's lots of detail. I would say that I think a lot of this kind of stuff works best quite close up. So if you're thinking about designing, think immersive and think quite intimate. And also think that it's not going to look brilliant in the depths of winter. So these are new design ideas you have to think about. Brilliant for things like banks. Again, you can see there that's been sprayed off, but not cultivated. Next shot should show us actually literally laying the turf onto that sprayed sward. And then that's the next season. Oh, and then we've just gone back in time. And then again, late season, bit pre-cut. And if you wanted to have revitalised this, let's say you've got a big event going on in August time, by putting an extra cut in earlier on, what is actually called the Chelsea chop, you can actually delay or you can get double flowering. So we've got meadows here at the moment which will be in flower till Christmas, because we've gone in June and done a chop in some places. and we've stimulated more flowering. Again, this just shows how some of these meadows change. This is golden summer. First year, you tend to get this quite flat look. You tend to get this dominance almost of a certain species, quite blingy. Next slide will show a year later. Against so again, you start to get this differentiation, and that is 5 years on. So you know, these are how the same thing will change according to where it is, but also because, you know, the plants start to create their own little ecosystems. So they're emulating natural processes. We don't go in here and start going, oh, there's a little bit too much of this, we're going to weed it out. You know, we might go in there and say there's a dock appeared, we're going to get rid of it, but not anything else. You let these natural cycles happen. And that's another quite interesting process. We get inundated almost every day with people sending their photos and going, you know, what should I do? Should I cut this? Should I spray this? Is it too much? Is it too little? And we just, most of the time, we just say, just chill, just relax. It'll be different. Yeah, it's all okay. So it's yeah, it's maybe not for the too stressed. More meadows going down, and more meadows flowering. So lots of different styles. More recently, we've been doing a lot of stuff in housing estates, which have been, and particularly social housing. So almost back to our roots. We started with social housing. We started with demolition sites. These are now, in fact, actually, Alison, just go back a picture, if you don't mind. This is probably one of those sites I showed you right at the very beginning with all the burnt out houses and the derelict land. Many years later now, new houses, and the inspiration that came from the very early meadows have now kind of returned to actually be creating the kind of the new housing landscapes for the future, but with perennials and with turf. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Yeah, shoot through that one. Infrastructure projects, you know, so the same kind of things that we've done with annuals. This is down in Cornwall. You know, these mega infrastructure projects where local authorities are looking at really trying to, you know, improve the entrance ways to their cities. They're working with the designers, working with the local authority. That's us doing stuff in Cornwall just before lockdown. My goodness, were we glad to get this down. I think we literally were coming back up the day before lockdown, and I think the next slide just shows some of the, you know. So it's just been an absolute riotous success. There's just meadows everywhere down there. We've been working with the Eden Project and the National Wildflower Centre actually on these. So there's a whole big project. Really frustrating not being able to get down to see these. And then finally, I think we're going to get onto Solihull, which is great. So so all of this has been going on, and as I say, it's spread out all over the place. We started to work with Solihull, crikey, I think about 4 years ago. I must have gone down to give a CPD, or maybe it was an APSI talk or something like that. There was a whole enthusiasm, I think, for what was called at the time Grey to Green, this idea about transforming the grey infrastructure into green infrastructure and creating you know, new styles of wildlife corridors and what have you. And I quite like Emma to sort of come in on this, but from my kind of knowledge of this was a massive infrastructure scheme, and I think it just emphasised how difficult these big schemes are to actually get off the ground. You know, how much you need to work together, how much you need to sort of staying power. So Emma, I don't know whether you'd like to. I've got a few slides actually on this, but whether you want to say something about your knowledge of this scheme. We might just move on to the next slide.
Yeah, I can say a little bit now if you like. Obviously, it's been a very big project for Solihull. It's much more than just a parks project. It sort of involves a lot of partnership working across the council, the Parks Public Realm team, environmental services, working with the highways team because we're improving a lot of footpaths and cycleways across the borough, and primarily our landscape architects team. They've been leading on this and coordinating everyone together. Also obviously a communications team because again, this size of project, a lot of communication involved. So it's a multi partnership working project.
Super, thanks. I think there's a couple more slides to follow. So this was the map, or part of the map. It was a bit of a night. I mean, it was great and very exciting for us when all this happened. So with the project, there's a whole range of things. There's tree planting, there's bulb planting, there's native wildflower seeding, there's a whole range of things. But we were certainly asked to provide some of this sort of pre-grown pictorial meadows. You know, one of the things was that it was the quite challenging sites. We're talking about road verges, we're talking about roundabouts, we're talking about inner city, and we're talking about, you know, a massive infrastructure project where, you know, time wasted on anything was going to really cause massive problems, you know, and you know, make the budget actually overrun and what have you. So I think when you're specifying, one of the joys about the turf, the flower turf, is that you know exactly what it is. It's a fixed cost. The trouble with seed is you don't quite know how much time and effort you're going to have to put into it. And when it comes to having to go and irrigate and weed, and you don't know what you're doing, it's a bit of a nightmare. It's a massive project. And for us, then, next slide, we actually had to pre-grow this stuff, you know, which was a huge amount. I mean, it's about 50,000 meters, and so we had to actually take in new fields, and we developed some bespoke mixes for it, and it was all pretty tense actually. It was a bit like the Olympics. It was quite a sort of you know, a scary thing. You know, would it work? Our entire money, I think, was kind of wrapped up in this, and then moving on, and then of course it came to some of it went down last year, and then of course the bulk of it, believe it or not, all needed to be laid from February, March, April and May time, just when lockdown happened. And I think we all just thought the entire world was going to implode. You know, it was horrendous. I have to say, absolutely hats off to the team. You know, and again, everybody working together, the contractor, you know, yeah, the Solihull, you know, it was absolutely fantastic. And we kept going throughout, and the stuff went down. And we had all that dry weather and all that wet weather. My team's down there today. I don't think, but I went down a few weeks ago, and this is basically the photographs I took. So these are the kinds of things, these highway verges, sort of images you've seen beforehand, but still, so I think the highway verge. Most of it is verges, and in a really wide range of neighbourhoods. And everything, I think, from Birmingham Airport entranceway to housing, to bus shelters, to everything. A Parks project, and it was lovely to see how they'd worked on this in a Parks project too. And again, with everyone socially distancing, it was just lovely to see people sort of spaced out around this landscape, grabbing a bit of fresh air and enjoyment. And I think there might be a couple of roundabout pictures to come. Yeah, roundabouts. We developed this mix particularly for Solihull, for the roundabouts, to get a really low growing but long season flowering meadow. And that seems to be working pretty well, actually. It's going to be interesting to see how it develops. And I think what I was really impressed with is actually the publicity. I think that may be something that I really need to reinforce. This was, from my perspective, a lot of effort was put into publicity. You know, these are big changes. There's a lot of money being spent, and I think the way it's been publicised, a special website, this lovely name like Wildflower Ways, the way things were signed and what have you, I think is a really powerful tool to use. And even this juxtaposition where you're waiting for something to happen, you know, you need to know why there's bare soil there, you know. And again, I'm not, having seen some of the comments, you'll always get people complaining, you know, always. But I think the more you publicise, the more you talk, the more you communicate, the more you provide knowledge and information about why you're trying to do this, you will take most of the people with you, you know, and people then become the advocates. So I was really, really impressed with that. Just to kind of like bring this to some conclusion, really, with a few more slides, and to maybe broaden the debate beyond meadows, there's been a lot of quite heated, I would say, over the years, tensions between the very hard ecological lobby and the work that we have been trying to do, which is much more about this designed ecology for particularly for our more urban environments and where you know, species poor. And it came to a big head actually last year. I mean, it's always gone on, and every time I have to give a talk, I have to talk about the impacts against and this whole ecological debate. And there was a whole set of publicity. It's the danger of social media, isn't it? The whole Rotherham River of Flowers went viral last year because it's always referred to as a wildflower meadow. A few really hardline ecologists are absolutely virulent with anger on this. You know, going, this is completely completely disgusting and people should just learn to love nature and that's it, and what have you. And we teamed up with Plant Life. I think Plant Life was a great advocate because there's also a massive movement around, yes, we should let our species-rich wildflower meadows be better managed, you know, for native wildflower flora. Of course we should. That is absolutely, you know, taken as read. But I think this is the thing. Nobody, well, maybe some people are, but we're certainly not, would suggest going into an area of species-rich flora, digging it up and sticking a load of annual bling in it. You know, that's not the idea. But I did point out that I have to say in my housing estates and in my urban parks, if I'd have had that right, you know, the picture with the orchids in, that's what I'd have been doing. But I can tell you they didn't exist. You know, if we had amenity grass, that was pretty good. You know, mostly it was brick rubble actually. So with Plant Life, this whole thing about there is a spectrum of solutions. You know, we as professionals, we need to get to understand that there is a spectrum and that there is appropriate solutions for different places. You know, so it is important that we stop using this terminology of wildflowers as a blanket sort of statement, and we start to learn more about this, and we start to use the right thing in the right place. So there's a few images now just to show different kinds of techniques as well. So there's been a lot of talk about rewilding in the press, and rewilding has a place, but with rewilding in very urban areas, this is quite challenging, you know, but it has a place to play, you know, where you are taking huge swathes of area and you are letting natural processes actually take over. Of course, this isn't a organised rewilding. This is just our canal system just getting a bit, you know, overgrown. But it's the same principle. But, you know, is that appropriate? Should we turn all of our parks and allow them to rewild? You know, I think the answer is probably not. So again, it has a place. British native perennial wildflower flora has a place in new schemes. This is a really old scheme now, a land life scheme, which used to be based up in Liverpool. It's British native perennial flora. It's beautiful. I think it's very subtle. And what was most interesting on this was it was very low maintenance because they extracted a metre of topsoil. So this is growing on the lowest fertility ever. Not a tiny little scrape, a metre. You're talking about significant soil extraction to do something like this. So if you have a chance to manipulate the substrate, you know, you can get different things as well. But most of the time, we can't always do that. You know, we've got a park, we've got an amenity piece of ground. You know, to suddenly go in with a digger and dig out a metre of soil, pretty challenging. But you know, it has a place to play, and I love this kind of stuff. And wherever we can convince people to manipulate substrate in the first place and not bring topsoil in. We're working on a big urban park at the moment, and we're just trying not to have any topsoil. You know, but it will take much longer. It'll take much longer to actually establish. So mix and match again, and a few more slides just to show some different things. This is our park, which is all about managed wilderness. Actually, it's all about how you carve into something which actually has some species richness. This was a mixture between old housing, mining, old allotments, goodness knows what. Complete wasteland, 22 hectares, brand new concept of a district park. It looks terribly rural, but in fact this is inner city Sheffield. So this is a concept around how you compartmentalize large swathes of planting, and you use different management techniques and this very tight mown edges and arenas set amongst this. So this is for very large scale, and we're still working on this. We've been building this park for 18 years, and we're still diving into these compartments and doing different things with them. It's a really interesting. You know, if you ever come to Sheffield on a CPD or anything like that, this park is a really good learning tool to see how you can take things from a different approach. Yeah. So we have put brand new stuff in, but a lot of it's about designing with nature. This is Highline in New York. This is again. It's almost like this is almost the kind of how to get on the very edge of wildness. It's a public park, and they just keep it at an interesting stage. But I tell you, this takes skill, because if they left this would be a forest. So it looks natural. It is natural. It's spontaneous vegetation, but it is managed. So you have to start to learn about how to do interventions. Just keep going with slides. This is another Sheffield scheme. this was wanting to bring the meadows into a much more urban context, but also to deal with all the significant flooding we have in Sheffield and continue to have. So this was designed to completely transform the ring road, to make it smaller, to bring in cycling and pedestrian ways, to humanise an area of the city that no one used, and but to create something that was much more applicable to a very hard urban environment, and to deal with all the stormwater management, which it has done amazingly effectively. So it filtrates all the water before it goes into the River Dom, and the water comes out crystal clear. So that was it just going in. We did all the substrate and the planting for this and managed it with the City Council, and that's it. I think it was a year later. Yeah. So this is a planted meadow scheme, highly designed. It's still just cut down every year. That's the main management tool, and raked off. But it's you can see it's much more designed for an urban environment. And because of the fact it's planted in gravel, and that allows us to play with plants that have a much greater longevity of flowering. It comes into flower very early in the season, and it's still got structure and structural grasses and what have you. So you can come up with some extraordinary things if you put a little bit more management in it, and again, it's designed and planned in. So this was the original Greater Green scheme that then went on, in a sense, to inspire Solihull a little bit on the Greater Green concept. And so lots of local authorities are now picking up this concept of greening the grey, and trying to find appropriate mechanisms and designs for this. So this naturalistic planting is very much expanding. And just I think the last couple of slides before I finally drop. Similar kind of thing, really. Nigel done it. It's the Barbican Centre in London, where again it's what we call a podium landscape. We do an awful lot of stuff with green roofs, but again this is a very deep, sort of 200 mil deep gravel bed, managed very much by the Friends group, you know. And I think this is another thing we found, that Friends groups and what have you, and volunteers have got much more involved and engaged in these ones, and have adopted areas because of the horticultural interest, you know, because they can actually do it, because they can actually add value, and because it's really exciting and stimulating. So this has gone from a really boring municipal sort of 70s planting scheme, you know, to this, which is now again, basically managed by the Friends. So it's some very beautiful colourways and styles you can do when it gets to the more expensive end. We tend to work, we're a bit cheapskates. We try and push it to the cheapest we can, but you can push it to the other degree. And just a few last slides, I think. Stitch fund, again, based on sand. Temporary schemes based on sand, mixing things together. Again, more extraordinary shapes and forms that you can actually get. So you can do lots of fun things with temporary schemes, 3 to 5 years, you know. And yeah, last but not least, probably the real extreme of naturalistic planting, when you start to do things like this. Living walls, unlike green roofs, are not very sustainable, but they are stunningly gorgeous, you know. But they are the real other extent. I think if you're after sustainability, this is a great way of bringing green into the city, great way of bringing biodiversity into the city, but that these are very, very high maintenance and are not resilient in the same ways as planted schemes. But, you know, I think it's useful to see. Last 2 slides. One is just to say there is a lot of literature out there, but it is really difficult to weave your way through all of this. You know, each one tells a certain story. Each one perhaps glosses over things. So, you know, each one, a lot of these are coffee table books that look to sell things. So it isn't easy to find the kind of technical information that really helps you on the ground, which is one of the things, you know, I think we're wanting to discuss, is actually how, you know, we can develop much more operational, much more practical, much more tangible sort of resources and training that will actually help, you know, people who are managing parks right across the UK, but, you know, with yourselves, obviously, we're talking about, you know, your whole forum. How can you start to take the steps to do this, but actually have handholding and not have to make all the mistakes that we've made over the years? So there is literature, but unfortunately, it's not. I couldn't recommend one book that you could pick up and go, this will tell you how to do it. No, I really can't. But last but not least, I have to do the commercial plug at the very end. You know, we do exist as an organisation. As I say, we're a not-for-profit. The parent is Green Estate. That's the social enterprise. That's the one that has all the parks management responsibilities. but the way we survive is that we, you know, we're obviously passionate about this, but we also produce stuff, we make stuff, we sell stuff, you know, we train people, and what have you. And just a reminder that regardless, you know, we're here essentially. You know, we hope that, well, I certainly hope that you get inspired, and if you haven't done this before, you're going to give it a go, and absolutely get to Solihull, absolutely get out. I think Coventry is doing stuff, we're doing stuff with Coventry on and off. There's a whole, I'm sure Chesterfield we've done stuff with, and we've probably worked with quite a few of you over the years. But the things are moving on all the time. So get out there and see stuff, come and see us. And let's actually also talk about how we might be able to, anyone who's interested, how you might actually develop some demonstration sites there and some learning, you know, plots and what have you, that, you know, you can sort of go from maybe not much confidence to really trying things out. And I think I've probably come to the end of everything, and we'll shut up.
Great, thank you ever so much, Sue. That was brilliant. So, questions. Have we got any questions from anyone?
Joe's got a little hand up.
Hi,
Joe?
Liz. It's Joe
Yeah.
from Birmingham.
Yeah.
Just, you gave us the cost for the annual schemes. Could you supply us with the cost for the perennial schemes?
I think the easiest thing is if I actually send them.
Yeah.
Perennial is a lot more expensive. I mean, things like the cost of the turf alone is about 17.50, I think, a square metre. So sowing by perennial seed, you know, it seems it's somewhere in between, but then the establishment costs are quite difficult to evaluate. But what I'll do is I'll send comparative costs so you've got an idea of them all. Certainly the easiest thing is to embed them into a capital scheme, and then if you can, you embed a couple of years of establishment. You know, if you're doing by seed perennial, definitely try and embed your establishment actually into your capital costs. And that's what most people are trying to do, is they're trying to, you know, basically do it as a capital scheme, and then what they're looking at, and I'm afraid this is one of the things that we would love to work with others actually on, is looking then at the longer term revenue savings as well. And again, that's quite difficult to evaluate because it all depends on the location, what you're currently doing, and what you're trying to achieve. As I say, we haven't yet managed to find something that is cheaper to both establish and then long-term manage than mown and miniature grass. I've got to be totally frank about that. But if you're comparing it with something like any floral feature, it does come out significantly cheaper. But yeah, I will send some more up-to-date costs.
Thanks, that's great.
Yeah.
Lovely.
James wanted to know about whether any of the Sheffield sites that you originally did with your annuals, whether they're now housing.
Yeah, they're mostly housing now. They're mostly housing, even though, of course, the housing programme slowed enormously, sort of, you know, when the recession hit. So they were meant to have all been developed out, but they are mostly housing.
Okay.
But within them, the landscapes it's informed the landscapes. So we've worked quite a lot, and as has the Sheffield Council as well, to look at more sustainable ecological design for the open spaces around the housing. So in particular, I would say that integrating sustainable urban drainage schemes with more naturalistic planting has been one of the big things that has actually happened here. So that early testing and then getting people familiar with it, and I suppose housing developers, even though again it's a bit like the kind of the Solihull story, you need immense persistence to see some of these schemes through to actually doing anything different, you know, because the minute it goes back to a developer, it'll go back to the least risk and the least imaginative, unfortunately.
Any other questions from anyone else? No. The next slide, I think, shows where the locations are in Solihull. So if you're interested, then you can get over to see some of them, which is great. And some contacts for how to get hold of people in Solihull to ask further questions, which is also good.
Liz, I just wondered, was there anything else that Emma wanted to add before we finish on? Emma's agreed very kindly to put forward a case study that we'll work on over the autumn period. But is there anything, Emma, you wanted to add, just to comment on that?
Yeah, just to say, if anyone does want to get over to Solihull, or if they're sort of driving past, all the sites very easy to access from the M42 junctions 4, 5, 6, sort of for the airport. Their areas are looking really, really good at the moment. And yes, I will be doing the case study with Alison sort of in the autumn to provide more detail. I can't talk much about the management of the sites yet, because obviously this is the first flowering season, so it's going to be interesting to see you know, after they're cut this winter, how they actually do come up again next year. Because sort of obviously keeping them well maintained will be key to a good display again next year. But yeah, it'll be interesting over the next few years how the sites develop.
Great, thank you, Emma. Oh, didn't want that. So we were then going to go on to open it up to Jo to talk a little bit about fairgrounds, travelling fun fairs. I was going to try and stop recording at this point as well. Can't find my button. My button's disappeared. There you go. Stop recording.
Does that stop?